I used to think my mom was just like any other mom. She cooked, she cleaned, she asked me if I had done my homework, and she hugged me tight every morning before I left for school. She didn't talk much about money. She didn't complain. She didn't cry in front of me. But I was wrong. She wasn't like any other mom. She was doing something that would take me years to understand. Something I would only begin to see clearly the day I found her collapsed on the kitchen floor. But let me start from the beginning. We didn't have much growing up. No vacations, no new clothes, no birthday parties with balloons and cake. We lived in a small one-bedroom apartment with peeling paint on the walls and a leaking pipe under the sink that made a soft dripping sound all night long. My bed was a thin mattress in the corner of the living room. My mom slept on the couch. Sometimes I caught her just staring at the ceiling late at night. I'd ask, "Mom, are you okay?" And she'd always say the same thing. "I'm just thinking, baby. Go back to sleep." I always did. Because I trusted her. I thought she had everything under control. But I didn't know what she was hiding. I didn't know about the bruises on her feet, or the burns on her arms from working double shifts at the diner. I didn't know she was working 3 jobs, cleaning office buildings at night, scrubbing floors in a hospital early in the morning, and serving food all afternoon. Just to pay for my books, my school fees, my dream. I didn't know. Not until everything came crashing down. It started on a Saturday morning. I woke up late. Mom wasn't home. That wasn't strange. She usually left early. But that day felt different. The house was too quiet. No kettle whistling. No music playing from her tiny radio. No smell of toast or tea. I waited. An hour passed. Then another. By 11 a.m., I started to worry. I called her phone. No answer. I called again. Nothing. That's when I noticed the envelope on the table. It had my name on it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt from a pawn shop. I looked closer. It said, "Gold chain. Sold for $75. It was her necklace. The only piece of jewelry she owned. My father gave it to her before he disappeared. She never took it off. Until now. That's when my stomach started to twist. Something was wrong. I opened the front door and ran down the stairs. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to find her. I checked the diner. Her shift had ended hours ago. I checked the hospital. They said she didn't show up that morning. I didn't know where else to go. So I came home. And that's where I found her. On the kitchen floor. Her face pale. Her hands cold. My heart nearly stopped. "Mom!" I screamed. "Mom, wake up!" She didn't move. I grabbed my phone and called an ambulance with shaking hands. The ride to the hospital felt like a dream. Or a nightmare. I sat beside her on the stretcher, whispering, "Please be okay. Please be okay. Please." The doctor told me it was exhaustion. Her body had shut down. He said she was severely dehydrated, anemic, and hadn't slept properly in weeks. Weeks. "Does she work long hours?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "She needs rest. And food. And care. She can't keep living like this." I stared at my mom's sleeping face. And for the first time, I saw it. The lines around her eyes. The tiredness in her bones. The quiet pain she had been carrying for years. And all for me. That night, I sat beside her hospital bed, holding her hand. I didn't cry. Not then. I was too numb. But when she woke up the next morning, looked at me, and whispered, "I'm sorry you had to see me like that." That's when I broke. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, tears rolling down my cheeks. She smiled weakly. "Because I didn't want you to worry. You're my son. You're supposed to dream, not worry about rent." I shook my head. "But 3 jobs, Mom. You could have died." She squeezed my hand. "It was worth it. To see you graduate one day. To see you walk into a college and know you made it." I didn't know what to say. So I just sat there, holding her hand, crying quietly, and promising myself one thing. I would not let her carry this burden alone anymore. From that day on, everything changed. I got a part-time job at the local library. I started applying for scholarships like my life depended on it. Because it did. I sold my old game console, my bike, anything I didn't need. I studied harder than I ever had before. Because now it wasn't just about me. It was about us. It was about making her sacrifice mean something. But it wasn't easy. There were days I came home from work and found her sitting in the dark, her eyes distant. There were nights I heard her crying in the bathroom, muffling the sound with a towel. There were mornings she pretended to be fine, even when her hands trembled as she packed my lunch. And through it all, she still smiled. Still said, "Have a good day, baby." Still kissed my forehead and said, "I'm proud of you." I don't know how she did it. How she gave so much and asked for nothing in return. How she kept pushing even when her body begged her to stop. How she carried the weight of 2 lives on her back. All I know is she's my hero. And one day, when I stood on that graduation stage, holding my college acceptance letter in one hand and looking out into the crowd, she was there, wearing a borrowed dress, sitting in the front row, smiling with tears in her eyes. And I saw it, the pride, the relief, the quiet joy of a mother who gave everything, and finally saw it all come back. That day, I walked off the stage, hugged her tight, and whispered, "This degree is yours too, Mom. You earned it more than I ever did." She held me close, and for the first time in a long time, we both cried. But this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of victory, of love, of a dream that didn't die, because one woman refused to give up. Not for herself, but for her son. I never saw her cry like that before. Not even the night Dad left. Not when we got eviction notices. Not when she came home limping from working a double shift on her swollen feet. But that day, under the big graduation banner, with my arms wrapped around her, she cried in a way that told me something inside her finally let go. Like her heart whispered, "You made it. He made it. You can breathe now." After the ceremony, we walked home instead of catching a cab. She said she wanted to feel the air. We held hands, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like I was just her child. It felt like I was walking beside a giant. She said, "I used to pray that I'd just hold on long enough to see you make it through." I looked at her, and for the first time, I said what I had been holding in for so long. "You didn't just hold on, Mom. You carried us." She smiled. But that smile, it was tired. It was different. She had done so much hiding. And now the truth was out. I saw the lines on her face, the bruises under her sleeves, the quiet ache in her knees every time she stood too long. So I made a decision. I wasn't just going to finish school. I was going to repay her. Somehow. Someday. Even if I could never match everything she gave, I was going to give her rest. College started with a mixture of excitement and guilt. Excitement, because I was finally walking the halls of a future I had dreamed of. Guilt, because every time I picked up a textbook or walked into class, I thought about her back home. Still waking up at 4 a.m., still cleaning hospital floors, still wearing that one pair of black sneakers with the broken soles. I worked part-time on campus. Took extra credits so I could finish faster. Lived in the cheapest dorm I could find. And every Sunday I called her. Sometimes we talked for 2 minutes, sometimes for an hour. She always ended the call the same way. "I'm fine, baby. Focus on your books. That's the only gift I want." But I could hear it in her voice. The cough she tried to hide. The tired sighs between words. The way her voice cracked when she said, "I miss you." One weekend, I came home to surprise her. I didn't call ahead. I just packed a small bag and took the bus. When I opened the door, I didn't see her on the couch. I found her in the bathroom, crouched beside the sink, her hands covering her face. She didn't hear me come in. I stood there, frozen, watching her shoulders shake silently. She was crying in secret. Again, I backed away slowly and waited in the living room. When she came out a few minutes later, her face was dry. She jumped when she saw me. "Baby, why didn't you tell me you were coming?" I hugged her tight. And this time, I didn't let go quickly. That night, we sat by the window with cups of hot tea and talked. Not like mother and son, but like 2 survivors. 2 warriors who had made it through a storm together. "Are you tired, Mom?" I asked. She looked out the window, then nodded slowly. "Yes, but I'm okay." "No," I said gently. "You don't have to say that anymore. Not to me." She looked at me, her eyes wet again. "You were always watching out for me," I continued. "Now let me do the same for you." She smiled, but I could see the wall she had built over the years was still standing. She didn't know how to stop being strong. She didn't know how to rest. But I was determined to help her learn. I started a journal that year. I wrote down every goal I had, every plan, every dollar I saved. Because I didn't just want to graduate. I wanted to build something. Something that would allow me to take her out of the life she had lived for too long. A life of bruised hands, aching feet, and silent tears. I took business classes. Watched videos on how to start side hustles. Joined student groups focused on entrepreneurship. I started reselling books online. Then tutoring. Then flipping old electronics. Anything legal. Anything honest. Anything that could help. And little by little, the money added up. I didn't touch a cent of it. It was all for her. Every dollar was a brick. Every hour I worked was a hammer hitting against that wall of struggle she had built her life inside of. 2 years into college, I had enough. Not to change the world, but to change hers. I went home with a letter and a small box. When she opened the door, I held out the envelope. "What's this?" she asked. I just smiled. "Open it." Inside was a printed page, her resignation letter, already filled out, signed with her name. She looked at me, confused. "I talked to the manager at the diner," I said. "They've already accepted it." She blinked. "What? Baby, I can't." "You can," I said, handing her the small box. Inside was a silver bracelet. Simple, beautiful, engraved with one word, rest. Her hands trembled as she lifted it out. "From now on," I said, "your only job is to live, to smile, to finally take care of yourself." She sat down slowly, and then she cried. But this time, it was the kind of cry that sounded like music. Soft, free, like her heart had been holding its breath for years and could finally exhale. I didn't become a millionaire overnight, but I built something, a small business that grew faster than I expected. I graduated, got my degree, and made a promise at her feet. "This is just the beginning, Mom. You gave me everything. Now it's my turn." She didn't say much, just took my face in her hands, looked deep into my eyes, and whispered, "It was never about the money. It was always about you. And I'd do it all again, just to see you standing where you are right now." And in that moment, I knew. No matter what I built in life, no matter how many awards I received or how high I climbed, nothing would ever compare to the quiet strength of the woman who worked 3 jobs in silence, just to give her son a chance to dream out loud. As I walked through the gates of my graduation ceremony, cap and gown weighing lightly on my shoulders, I could feel the years pressing behind me like shadows. Years of watching her disappear into the early morning light, years of cold leftovers waiting on the kitchen counter, years of never knowing how close we were to losing it all. And yet she never let me feel it. Not fully. She wrapped every struggle in silence, every pain in a smile, every hunger in a joke. She carried so much, and all I ever saw was the surface. Until I learned to look deeper. As they called my name and I walked across the stage, I didn't look at the chancellor. I didn't look at the cameras or the crowd. I looked for her. And I found her. Front row. Eyes filled with tears. Hands clasped tightly in front of her chest. Wearing the same dress she wore to church every Easter. The one she ironed so carefully it looked brand new. I raised the scroll in the air. She stood, clapping with everyone else, but I could tell. To her, the room had disappeared. It was just her and me. Her son. The one she protected with her whole life. And in that moment, all the things she'd sacrificed came rushing back. The time I caught her sleeping in the break room between jobs. The day she sold her phone to pay for my school uniform. The night she used her scarf to cover a burn on her arm, so I wouldn't ask questions. And now this moment. Her reward. Not money. Not gifts. Just a piece of paper. And a promise fulfilled. After the ceremony, there was a small reception outside. People posed with their families. Balloons floated into the sky. Laughter filled the air. We didn't have a banner or a professional photographer. Just my phone and each other. We stood under a tree while a kind stranger took our picture. She hugged me tightly and said, "Your father would have been proud." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. But inside I knew he missed it. She didn't. She was always there. Even when she wasn't. Even when she was working a 3rd shift. Even when her hands were too tired to stir the pot. Even when her body screamed for rest. Her love was there. Strong. Steady. Silent. That was her way. She didn't shout her sacrifices. She folded them into the corners of our lives. Like the note she used to put in my lunchbox. "I love you. Keep going." We walked home that day just like we did after high school. She held my hand the way she used to when I was small. And as we walked past the old bakery, the one she used to clean after midnight, I stopped. "I remember this place," I said. She smiled. "You used to wait outside while I mopped the floors. Fell asleep on that bench more than once." I looked at the bench. Still there. Old but standing. Like her. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Here," I said, handing it to her. She unfolded it slowly. Her eyes scanned the page. Then she gasped. "An offer letter?" she said, her hand over her mouth. For me, I nodded. Director of Operations. Part-time. Flexible hours. Full benefits. She shook her head in disbelief. But I don't have a degree. You have a life degree, I said. You built a business without even knowing it. You taught me everything I know about management, discipline, and heart. You've already been running things, just in a different battlefield. She laughed, that soft, watery laugh she only made when her heart was too full to speak. You always wanted me to rest, she whispered. But you never stopped planning. I grinned. Because I learned from the best. She took the paper in her hands and held it like something sacred. Does this mean I can stop now? I looked at her, eyes sharp with certainty. You already did enough. Now it's time to live. Over the months that followed, she bloomed. Literally. She started a small garden on the apartment balcony. Planted tomatoes, peppers, herbs. She bought a journal and started writing her thoughts. She even enrolled in an adult learning program. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And the most beautiful thing? She laughed more. Louder. Longer. With her whole chest, like she was finally remembering how joy felt in her own skin. Sometimes I would catch her sitting by the window, sipping tea, staring out at nothing in particular. And she would say, I never thought I'd make it to the other side. I'd nod and say, You didn't just make it, Mom. You dragged us both here. One evening, she handed me an old envelope. Inside were faded receipts, torn pay stubs, and tiny slips of paper, tracking every payment she had ever made for me. Books, uniforms, bus fare, exam fees, even snacks for my field trip in 8th grade. Why did you keep all these? I asked. She shrugged. They reminded me why I was working. I stared at them for a long time. It looked like nothing, but it was everything. Paper proof of a mother's quiet war. I placed them in a small wooden box and locked it. A time capsule of sacrifice, of love, of legacy. And now I tell her story. Everywhere I go. At speaking events, at youth centers, on podcasts, and online. Because people need to know that heroes don't always wear capes or walk into meetings with power suits. Sometimes they mop floors with aching hands and still smile when they come home. Sometimes they go hungry, so you don't have to. Sometimes they hold the weight of 2 lives without letting one crumble. My mother did all that and more. And she did it quietly. But now I tell the world loudly. She worked 3 jobs in secret, so I could live in the open. She gave up sleep, so I could dream. She gave up comfort, so I could grow. She gave up her voice, so I could find mine. And now, I speak for her. Because no story deserves to be told more than the one of a mother, who chose love over rest, sacrifice over ease, and her child's future over her own comfort. Always. Every time. No matter the cost. Years passed. But I never forgot. Every time I walked into a boardroom, every time I signed a deal or gave a speech, every time someone clapped for me or called me sir, I heard her voice in my head. That soft, familiar voice whispering, be kind. Stay focused. And never forget where you came from. I never did. I carried her story like a badge on my chest. Not for pity. Not for praise. But because it was the foundation of everything I stood on. She had taken broken hours, scattered shifts, aching bones, and turned them into bricks. And from those bricks, she built me. I was the house. She was the hands. One morning, years after graduation, I walked into the apartment where we had lived for so long. It hadn't changed much. The walls still had the same chipped paint. The old calendar was still hanging near the fridge. And the bench near the door still creaked the same way it always had. But she wasn't there. Not because she was gone, but because I had finally moved her out. Into a real home. Her own. No shared hallway. No leaky pipes. No thumping neighbors or landlords knocking at odd hours. Just peace. She had a garden now. A sunroom. A porch with 2 rocking chairs and a wind chime that danced when the breeze came through. She had a life now. Not just a routine. Not just survival. A life. And every time I visited, I brought something new. A flower pot. A photo frame. A memory. One day, I brought her something else. A gold box. Inside it was a necklace. Not just any necklace. It looked just like the one she sold to pay for my textbooks in high school. The one Dad gave her. She gasped when she saw it. Tears filled her eyes instantly. Where did you get this? She asked. I had it remade, I said. I couldn't find the original, but I had them copy the exact design. I wanted you to have it again. She reached out, her fingers trembling, and held it up to the light. Then she did something that broke me. She leaned forward, rested her head on my shoulder, and cried. Not loud, not desperate, just soft, grateful tears. I didn't think I'd ever see something like this again, she whispered. I thought those days were gone. I held her hand. They are, I said. But you're still here. And that's what matters. She wore that necklace every day after that. Not to show off, but to remind herself of how far she'd come. Sometimes she would sit on her porch, holding a cup of tea, and trace her fingers over it absent-mindedly. And if anyone asked her what she was thinking, she'd smile and say, just remembering how I carried the world and didn't drop it. One year, I was invited to speak at a global leadership summit. Thousands of people. Cameras. Reporters. CEOs. I was the final speaker of the evening. But before I stepped on stage, I told the event manager I wanted someone special to introduce me. When they called her name, she looked at me in shock. Me, she whispered. I nodded. She walked out slowly, carefully, wearing a deep blue dress I had picked out for her weeks before. When she stood at the mic, she looked nervous for a second. Then she began. I'm not a business expert. I'm not famous. I'm just a mother who once worked 3 jobs, so her son could sit in the kinds of rooms I was never allowed in. And today, I stand here not to brag, but to tell the world something important. That behind every successful child, there is usually a parent whose sacrifices will never be fully understood. And if I could do it all again, every sleepless night, every aching morning, every single shift, I would. Because my son was worth it. And now, he's going to tell you what he did with that chance. The entire hall stood up. Applause echoed like thunder. She walked off the stage, tears in her eyes, and hugged me tightly. Now go show them what we built, she whispered. I walked to the microphone. And I told our story. Our real story. Not the one in the magazines. Not the one in press releases. The one about a mother with calloused hands and a quiet heart. Who gave up everything so her son could have something. Who never asked for applause, but finally received it. And that night, when we got home, she looked at me and said, You've done enough now, baby. You've made me proud. I can rest. I looked at her and smiled. No, Mom, I said. Now, it's my turn to carry you. And she smiled, the kind of smile that lets you know. The fire was worth it. The fight was worth it. The love was never wasted. It built something. Something lasting. Something greater than we ever imagined. She moved slower these days. Not because she was sick or weak, but because she could finally afford to. There was no longer a train to catch, a boss to please, or a customer snapping fingers at her like she wasn't a whole human being. She didn't have to rush anymore. Time had finally bent in her favor. I would watch her sometimes, standing in her garden in the early morning, wearing that old house robe she refused to throw away. She'd hum softly, watering her flowers, smiling at the rising sun like she was saying good morning to an old friend. She looked at peace. But I knew, beneath that peace were years of pain stitched carefully into her silence. She didn't need to talk about the nights she went to bed hungry, or the hours she spent cleaning toilets while pretending not to hear people gossiping about her behind closed office doors, or the times she cried in the dark, clutching bills she didn't know how to pay. She didn't need to say any of that, because I saw it now, not just in her stories, but in her bones, her hands, her eyes. Eyes that had stared down hardship and refused to blink. One afternoon, I found an old notebook tucked inside a drawer in her kitchen. It was thin, with a faded red cover and bent pages. Inside, she had written goals. Not big goals. Not own a house or retire by 50. Simple ones. Buy him new shoes before school starts. Don't cry if they increase the rent again. Put away N500 every week for his textbooks. Make sure he doesn't know I'm tired. One day, maybe rest, just a little. I read those words with tears streaming down my face. Because these weren't dreams. These were sacrifices dressed up as checklists. And every single one was about me. That night, I sat beside her on the porch. She was sipping tea. I was silent, still holding the notebook in my hands. I found this, I said, placing it on her lap. She looked down at it, then chuckled softly. I didn't even know I still had that. You wrote all this, I said, voice cracking. All those years you were dying slowly so I could live. She didn't respond right away. Then she said, I wasn't dying. I was planting. Planting seeds in dirt no one else wanted to touch. And now look, she gestured to me with a smile. You're the tree. Later that month, I organized a surprise event for her. It wasn't her birthday. It wasn't Mother's Day. It was just her day. I invited all the people whose lives she had touched, former neighbors, old coworkers, my teachers, friends, even some of the women she used to clean with. The banner read, "A celebration of strength for the woman who carried the world." She walked into the hall and froze. Tears hit her eyes instantly as the room burst into applause. One by one, people stood up to speak. A woman from the hospital, where she once mopped floors, said, "She used to leave sticky notes for us cleaners with Bible verses and encouraging words. I kept one in my purse for 10 years. My old math teacher said, 'This woman didn't just raise a son, she raised a miracle.' I remember how she walked an hour in the rain just to attend a parent-teacher meeting." Angela, her friend from the diner, stood up with shaky hands. We all complained about the work, but she never did. She just said, "I've got a boy who's going to change the world. That's what keeps me going." My mother just sat there, crying quietly, shaking her head like she couldn't believe it was really happening. But it was. The world had finally paused to applaud the woman who never asked for it. At the end, I stood in front of everyone and said, "You see a kind, gentle woman, but I see a warrior. A woman who bled quietly and smiled through it. A woman who worked 3 jobs with swollen feet and a broken heart. A woman who gave up her life so I could have mine. She didn't just raise a child. She raised a future." The entire room stood again. She came forward, held my face, and said the same words she always said when she was proud. "You make me feel like I didn't lose." And I said, "That's because you won, Mom. You won." Now she travels. She sends me pictures from places I had only seen in books. The Eiffel Tower in France. The pyramids in Egypt. Mount Kilimanjaro, the highest mountain in Africa. Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the world. Kruger National Park in South Africa. She wears wide-brimmed hats now and walks slowly through museums, breathing in the life she had once only seen through cracked windows and dusty screens. And everywhere she goes, she carries a little notebook, not for goals, but for memories. She sends me photos of pages with things like, "Saw a painting that reminded me of you." A boy at the airport asked his mom if she was tired. I smiled. I'm finally resting. For real this time. And when I see those messages, I don't just smile. I breathe. Because I know she's no longer surviving. She's living. And me? I still work hard. I still speak. Still build. Still give. But no matter what I do, I never forget where it all began. A tired woman on a broken bus seat. Holding grocery bags with one hand, dreams with the other. Quietly praying, "Lord, don't let this pain be wasted. Let my son go further than I ever could." And he did. Because her love was the kind that didn't need an audience. It just needed one reason. And that reason was me. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of cinnamon and warm butter. I walked into the kitchen of her new home. Sunlight pouring through the window, the wind chime whispering outside, and there she was, wearing her soft pink robe, hair tied up, standing at the stove, flipping pancakes like she used to when I was little. I leaned against the doorframe and just watched her for a moment. Free. Alive. Unrushed. Back to cooking again? I teased. She smiled without turning around. "You think I forgot how?" I walked over and hugged her from behind. "I didn't think I'd get to have mornings like this again," I said. She placed the last pancake on the plate and turned to face me. Neither did I. We sat at the table, just the two of us. No noise, no work calls, no rush to get out the door. Just peace and pancakes. She looked at me over her tea and said, "Do you know what the hardest part was?" I shook my head. It wasn't the jobs. It wasn't the pain. It wasn't even the hunger. She paused. It was pretending. Pretending like everything was okay when it wasn't. Smiling so you wouldn't ask questions. Hiding the truth from the one person I wanted to protect more than anything. I looked down at my plate. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I wish I'd seen it sooner." She reached over and touched my hand. "You weren't supposed to. You were just a child. I wanted to give you the freedom to grow without fear. And now look at you." She looked around the house, then back at me. "You've made a world I never even dreamed of." I felt a lump rise in my throat. Because she didn't just raise me. She raised hope. She raised legacy. She raised a future out of scraps and exhaustion, and a kind of love that only gets stronger the more it's tested. Months later, I had an idea. A new project. One I knew would change lives. I called it The Second Shift. a community fund and mentorship program for single mothers working multiple jobs. Women like her. Women who were unseen, unheard, unthanked. Women who were still walking home late at night, their uniforms damp with sweat and sacrifice. I told her about it one evening on the porch. She leaned back in the rocking chair, watching the sun sink low. "You really think it can help people?" she asked. "I know it will," I said. She looked at me with that same soft expression she wore the night I got into college. Not proud, not surprised, just sure. Like she always knew this was the path I'd walk. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Old, crinkled, torn at the edges. I opened it. It was one of her pay slips. $54.72. 2 days of overnight cleaning. She had kept it. For what? I asked. She shrugged. Proof that even the smallest sacrifices can lead to the biggest changes. I framed that pay slip. It now hangs in the lobby of the Second Shift Foundation, right under the words, "This is where sacrifice becomes seed. This is where mothers become legends." And every woman who walks through that door, every tired mother with blistered hands and hopeful eyes, sees it. They see her story, and they know they're not alone. Years from now, when people ask me where it all started, the drive, the fire, the hunger to build and give and lift others, I'll tell them this. It started in a dim little apartment, with a woman who worked 3 jobs and never told anyone she was hurting. A woman who walked through hell in silence, so her child could rise in the light. A woman who gave everything she had, and somehow still kept giving. A woman who taught me that true greatness doesn't shout. It whispers. In the early morning light. In the creak of a rocking chair. In the gentle press of a hand over yours. And I'll say her name. Loudly. Proudly. This is my mother. She didn't just raise me. She rescued me. And the world will know. A mother's love is the kind of story that never ends. Now that I had grown into the man she believed I could be, I realized something even deeper. My success wasn't mine alone. It was never about one boy getting a degree or building a business. It was about her vision, her relentless faith in the unseen. She saw something in me before I saw it in myself, and she watered that seed every single day with her sweat, her time, her health, her life. And now, wherever I go, I carry her story like a lantern. Because in a world that often overlooks people like her, the quiet ones, the tired ones, the invisible giants, I want everyone to know. She existed. She mattered. She won. One day, while speaking to a group of young college students about resilience and family, someone raised their hand. "Sir," the girl asked shyly, "what's the one thing your mother said that stayed with you the most?" I didn't answer immediately. I closed my eyes, and her voice came rushing back. Not one phrase, but many hundreds of little sayings she would whisper while tying my shoelaces, packing my lunch, wiping tears from my face. But one stood out more than the rest. I smiled and said, "She once told me, even if you have nothing in your pocket, walk like you have the whole world in your heart." That's how she lived. The room went quiet. Some students smiled. Some wiped their eyes. And I knew right then, her legacy was not just in me. It was echoing into places she'd never even stepped foot in. And that is power. A year later, I wrote a book about her story. It wasn't filled with fancy words or complicated sentences. It was simple, just like her. Each chapter told a piece of her journey. Not the cleaned-up version, but the raw truth, the hunger, the humiliation, the heartbreak, and the quiet strength that stitched everything together. We titled it, 3 Jobs and a Dream. When the first printed copy arrived, I handed it to her. She turned each page slowly, like the paper might melt in her hands. When she reached the dedication page, she read it out loud. For the woman who went without so I could go further. For the woman who didn't just raise a son, she raised a future. She looked up at me with glassy eyes. And for the first time in a long while, she looked speechless. I leaned in and said, "This time the world will know your name." She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. The way she held the book to her chest said it all. After the book, the letters started coming in. From other mothers. From children who had never told their parents thank you. From strangers who said her story gave them hope. From a teenage boy who wrote, "Your mom sounds like my mom. I'm going to hug her when she gets home from work tonight." I didn't understand her before. I think I do now. I read that one out loud to her. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "That's enough. That's more than I ever dreamed of." Eventually, The day came when she finally stopped working completely. No more consulting. No more guest speeches. No more writing deadlines. She told me, "I think I just want to rest now, like really rest." So we planned something special. I took her to a cabin in the mountains, quiet, peaceful, full of green. It had a porch with a swing and a view of the trees. Every morning, she'd sit out there with her tea, humming to herself. No stress. No alarms. No timelines. Just peace. One morning, I joined her. We watched birds hop across the railing. She sipped her tea. I sipped mine. Then she said, "If I had to do it all again, every job, every tear, every broken night, I would. Because the view from here? It's worth everything I lost back then." I didn't speak. I just nodded. Because I knew. It wasn't just about where we were now. It was about who she became getting here. That night, she fell asleep early. I watched her from the doorway, peaceful, soft breathing, face calm. And I remembered the first time I saw her sleep deeply. The morning after my graduation, when she finally felt it was safe to rest. Now, years later, she was still resting. And I was still watching over her. Roles reversed. But the love? Still the same. Still pure. Still sacred. And as I turned off the light, I whispered into the room. "Thank you, Mom. For the days you didn't quit. For the nights you cried alone. For the pain you never spoke about. And for the love you never stopped giving, even when it cost you everything. You taught me what strength looks like in silence. And now the world knows. You were never just a mother. You were my beginning, my battle, and my becoming. And no matter how far I go, I will always return to the memory of your hands. The ones that cleaned, cooked, comforted, and carried me. Until I could walk on my own. But even now, even with everything I've become, I still need them. Because your love built me. And I will never stop telling the world. Behind every great man, there may be 1,000 stories, but mine begins with one woman, who worked 3 jobs and never let go of my hand. It was a quiet evening. The kind of evening where the world feels still, like it's holding its breath just for you. We had just come back from an event where I was awarded a community leadership recognition. The room was filled with applause, handshakes, flash photography. But the moment that mattered most? It wasn't on that stage. It was right here, in this living room, where she sat curled up on the couch, her shoes off, her smile soft, and her eyes full of pride. Can you believe all this came from one apartment, one mattress, and a mother who couldn't sleep? I asked. She chuckled. Believe it? I prayed for it. Every night. She looked at me and added, I just didn't think I'd live long enough to see it all come true. That hit me harder than she knew. Because for years, I lived with the fear that she might not. That one day, I'd come home and she'd be gone, burned out, worn down, buried beneath the weight she carried for us both. But here she was. Alive. Laughing. Rested. And for the first time, I didn't see the woman who struggled. I saw the woman who won. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us taking in the peace that we had fought so hard for. Then she turned to me and said, You've made a life for us. But baby, don't forget to live in it. I blinked. What do you mean? She smiled. You've been building, running, giving. But it's okay to slow down. To feel joy. To celebrate, not just survive. Her words sank into me like warm tea on a cold night. She was right. So much of my life had been about escaping struggle, proving we were worth more than what we were handed. I never truly paused to enjoy what we had finally earned. That night, I made a new promise. Not to build more. Not to hustle harder. But to live better. To laugh freely. To love deeper. To rest, the same way I had begged her to. And more importantly, to carry others the way she carried me. The next morning, I stood on the back porch watching the sunrise over the garden she loved. The tomatoes were growing strong. The peppers had blossomed. And her herbs, always carefully labeled in her neat handwriting, were in full bloom. I thought about the seeds she had planted in me all those years. Seeds of resilience, of quiet strength, of love that never needed to announce itself to be powerful. And now they had grown, not just in me, but in every life we'd touched through the work we were doing. She joined me outside, 2 mugs in hand. Still thinking? She asked. I nodded. Always. She handed me my tea. Think with your heart more often. It doesn't overcomplicate things like your head does. I smiled. You should have been a philosopher. She shrugged. I was too busy being your mother. I looked at her, really looked at her. And I saw a woman who had lived many lives in one. The tired one. The hungry one. The hopeful one. The the one who cleaned floors, the one who packed lunches, the one who stayed up praying beside a window with nothing but faith and unpaid bills. Now she was the one who made it. And because of her, I made it too. We stood there, side by side, watching the sun rise on a new day. A day that didn't begin with pain. A day that wasn't about survival. A day that simply was. And in that golden silence, I felt something I hadn't fully felt in years. Peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was finally whole. Later that day, I started writing a book. It wasn't about business. It wasn't about success. It was about her. About the woman behind the scenes. The one who cooked, cleaned, cried quietly, and loved loudly without ever saying too much. The one who wore cheap shoes and carried luxury love in her heart. The one who didn't just survive hard times. She transformed them into stepping stones for her son's destiny. And at the very top of the page, in bold letters, I wrote the dedication. For my mother, the woman who worked 3 jobs, so I could live one beautiful life. I don't know if the world will ever fully understand what she did, but I will never forget. Because this is not just my story. It's ours. And it's only the beginning. If this story touched your heart in any way, please don't leave without subscribing to Spesh Stories right here on YouTube. Though it was told in first person, please note, it is a fictional story, inspired by real-life experiences shared with someone close to the Spesh Stories community. The names, events, places, and details have been changed for storytelling purposes. We share real, powerful stories like this, stories filled with struggle, love, betrayal, healing, and quiet strength. Because sometimes the stories we tell are the mirrors we all need. Thank you for watching. And until next time, stay strong, love deeply, and keep believing. Subscribe now, and let's keep these stories alive.